This is the Mycological Association of Washington July meeting. Welcome. If this is your first time with us, then we normally meet at Kensington Library, and we are meeting online every month on the first Tuesday of the month. And that will go on at least as far as we can see into the future through this year, more than likely. Our other events that are normally scheduled on an annual basis, we have a mushroom fair that would normally be in October that has now been canceled. That would be at Brookside Gardens, but they are not hosting anything there this year. We also normally have a foray in Pennsylvania called Sequanota. That is also canceled for this year. We are going to try and have meetings almost every month. We may try and do an identification meeting as one of those. The only two areas of our other endeavor that are open are forays and culinary, which can be outside, or culinary. I know we have different ways of pronouncing that. I don't know why I do the long U, but then I have my own ways of saying things, as you know. So we're going to have a board meeting at the end of this month, and we'll kind of discuss and figure out what we're going to do for the rest of the year, how we're going to modify these meetings, and maybe what we can do on a limited basis as a gathering of some sort, as a foray or as a cooking event. So that's kind of the introduction. So the only program that I know of in the future is our next month meeting, which is in August the 4th, I believe it is. And that's, yes, and that's Dr. Megan Romberg, who's going to talk about fungal smuts, and I almost said sluts, smuts and rust. I guess that's part of the subject for tonight, and maybe that drew me to the other spelling or pronunciation of smuts. And they're close for different reasons, right? One's a textual thing, and the other one, I guess, refers to a person in a way, but it's on smuts and rust, and not the former kind. We're talking about that tonight, maybe. And that will be Dr. Shannon Nix, who's our former science advisor, who will talk on the subject of mushroom sexuality, or you could say lots of things about that, but I'll let her do that. So let me now introduce, well, we have the board members. Normally I would introduce them, but since I don't think it's necessarily, we can't raise our hands, and unless someone has, at the end I'll call to see if anybody wants to make a specific comment. But for the moment, since we're on programs, let me introduce Tom McCoy, who's our program chair, to talk about any additional thoughts he may have about programs in the future. And then we can segue right into his presentation, which is the next item on the agenda, which is the fungus in focus, which is Huitlacoche. But he'll do better at that than I will. So Tom, you want to take over for the moment?
Sure. So going back to programs, William alluded to our program next month. And I kind of like the symmetry of how this all came together. Tonight we're going to be listening to Shannon Nix, who is our outgoing science advisor. And next month we're going to be listening to our new incoming science advisor, Megan Romberg, who's going to be telling us about the fungi in our neighborhood. This is going to be a talk that focuses on rusts and smut fungi and molds and mildews. In addition to that, I believe we will also have a short program on slime molds. September, you want to put a little X in your calendar. September is going to be an outstanding program. For that, we're going to have a short program from a chef by the name of Zachary Mari. He's going to tell us about the edible fungi of Thailand, and our long lecture will be a mushroom savant from the West Coast. His name is Daniel Winkler. He leads mushroom-themed tours in Asia and in Latin America, and literally has written one of the books on medicinal mushrooms. In October, this is another lecture that I'm really looking forward to. We're going to have a professor from the University of Miami of Ohio. His name is Nicholas Money. He's written several books on science, in particular on fungi. One of his best known ones is called Mr. Bloomfield's Orchard. His most recent one is a book on yeast, and that's what his lecture will focus on. And I just love the name of this lecture. It's called The Rise of Yeast and the Fall of Man. So that's something to look forward to in the coming months.
All right, so, all right, and I'll do this part now. Are there any other board members that would like to chime in on their area of expertise or make a comment? And I don't want to pause too long for that. So, and I'm not sure who all is here except the first vice president, the treasurer, and Tom, and obviously the membership chair is there. I'm not sure who else is, which is Rick Silva. So, Tom, you want to go ahead with your your fungus in focus now? Then we'll cover that first.
Sure. Hopefully this works.
Yep.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. So, name of this presentation is Huitlacoche, the mushroom that built an empire. Our May meeting this year would have been held on Cinco de Mayo, which is when I'd originally intended to give this lecture, talking about a Mexican mushroom. Just seemed like the perfect antojito, which is the word for appetizer in Mexico, on Cinco de Mayo. But thanks to COVID, we had to regroup, and now I'm talking about Huitlacoche for the 4th of July. The corn fungus MAWDC, or its synonym, Huitlacoche, receives its species name from the plant it parasitizes, Zea maize, better known as simply corn or maize, the American cereal grain. However, like all edible fungi, MAWDC has a common name, Huitlacoche, which is a Spanish corruption of the Nahuatl Huitlacoche. Nahuatl was the native language of the Aztecs and a few other pre-conquest tribes of central Mexico. While the debate continues, many linguists believe it means sleeping excrement. Yes, you heard that correctly. I did just say sleeping excrement. It's likely that sleeping describes the manner in which the fungus grows, out of sight and hidden beneath the corn husk. Excrement, though, is a little more difficult to explain, but one should remember that the Aztecs thought differently about this taboo subject and employed night soil, or human excrement, as the primary fertilizer in the floating gardens that fed their empire. These agricultural lands were incredibly productive and rich, and I think it's safe to assume that a superficial appearance between Huitlacoche, notice the dark tint in the photo, and night soil was at least part of the rationale behind the indigenous name. One other name you sometimes hear is Mexican truffle. I assure you, though, Huitlacoche is not a truffle, is only distantly related to truffles, and cannot even begin to compare with those earthy treasures. Which is not to say it can't be good, it's just not truffle good. Mexican truffle is a term first coined in the 1980s when the culinary institution, the James Beard Foundation, began promoting this traditional Mexican ingredient for American cookery. I have to imagine this was very much to the chagrin of the USDA, which at that time had expended a great deal of effort attempting to eradicate Huitlacoche, this common corn parasite, over the prior decades. Its popularity has slowly but steadily grown since the 80s, and while it's more common to find it sold in cans at a Latino market, sometimes you can find it fresh at a farmer's market now. Huitlacoche is a smut fungus, and before you let your imaginations run away from you, a smut fungus is called a smut fungus simply because it looks dirty, not because of a tarnished reputation. Smut is a word that comes from Germanic and means to stain or mark with soot, which makes sense considering a common characteristic amongst smut fungi is their dark-colored spores. These specialty spores are called teleospores, which need to survive the winter and have thick cell walls for protection, thus giving them their lamp black appearance. Smut fungi mainly affect non-woody plant species, especially members of the grass and sedge families, where they thrive in the soft tissue, hijacking the plant's resources and reproductive system. In 2 cases, the smut fungi is edible, Huitlacoche in the upper photo and Huitlacoche esculenta in the lower right, which causes the stem of an Asian aquatic grass to swell into what's considered a delicacy. But if you want to sample it, I'm afraid you're going to have to travel to Asia. It's illegal to bring this Asian fungus into this country for fear it'll attack the American wild rice crop. Also, note that the proper time to harvest smut fungi for consumption is while it's still immature, and the teleospores have not yet fully developed, thus the pristine white in the lower photo because it lacks the dark spores that give smut fungi their name. Because Huitlacoche is a common parasite of an important commercial crop, its life cycle has been well studied. Beginning at 3 o'clock in the diagram to the right, we arrive at the life cycle phase that we're familiar with, when the individual corn kernels have been hijacked by the fungus, producing the large tumors that we've come to associate with Huitlacoche. This fungus was once considered a puffball because of this phase. As the tumors mature, they become completely filled with dark teleospores that will be swept away by the wind. As a precursor to Shannon's lecture, please take note that the fungus is diploid, or contains 2 distinct sets of DNA during this phase. If the wind-dispersed teleospore should happen to land on soil, it begins to grow mycelium, here called promycelium, and sustains itself by consuming dead vegetative material. We are now at the next phase of the life cycle, at 6 o'clock in the diagram, where meiosis, or the combination of the two, or the combining of the 2 sets of genetic material occurs. As growth in the soil continues at 9 o'clock in the diagram, the promycelium will begin to bud a spore-like body called sporidia, and a process similar to what occurs in brewer's yeast. Note that the organism at this stage is haploid, containing only 1 complete set of DNA, and if all goes correctly, at least from the fungus's point of view, the following year, as the corn emerges from the soil, it will carry with it some of these soil-based sporidia. It's at this stage the sporidia will begin to grow, and if they should come into contact with a compatible mating type, another sporidia, there will be an exchange of genetic material as the fungus continues to grow and eventually infect its host. While the corn can be infected via any open wound on the plant, it usually happens in the channel, the top part of the year where the female flowers, the corn silk, emerges. And once inside the ear, we're back where we started, and the process repeats itself. Now that we've covered the obligatory science stuff, we're going to shift gears and speak about anthropology, but don't worry, it'll all tie together back in the end. Human migration to the Americas is a long-standing debate, and although significant questions remain, the most commonly accepted anthropology model states that the route occurred across the Beringia land bridge or Bering Straits during the final Pleistocene ice age, sometime between 13 and 16,000 years ago. It goes without saying those first hunter-gatherers would have been greeted by a vastly different Americas. And one of the principal differences is that at the time of the migration, the Americas were richly populated with a diverse megafauna, or animals that weigh in excess of 44 kilograms. A shortened list of animals that have since become extinct includes mammoths and mastodons, many species of ungulates, or hoofed animals, giant tortoises and sloths, an armadillo that weighed up to a ton, and a giant beaver that could be up to 6 feet long. Now imagine that. Much of this diversity would sadly become extinct in the waning years of the Pleistocene and the current Holocene due to a combination of changing climate and the presence of a new apex predator, i.e. us, humans. While it's depressing to think about how richly diverse American fauna was before we arrived, I mention it now to frame the environment for the indigenous peoples of the Americas during the pre-Columbian era. With few wild species of game to hunt and or domesticate, in order to survive, to prosper in fact, indigenous peoples had to turn to agriculture in order to feed the masses. The mother of invention is necessity, and without question, the greatest gardeners in history were the indigenous peoples of this hemisphere, and amongst them, the tribes of Mesoamerica, modern-day Mexico and Central America, were arguably the most successful. If one were to remove plants domesticated in Mesoamerica from the local megamart, your shopping experience would be entirely different. At the time of the conquest, the only familiar sources of Aztec animal-based protein, at least for our palate, would have been domesticated turkeys and duck, as well as fish and crayfish, from Lake Texcoco, which surrounded the Aztec capital city of Tenochtitlan, or modern day Mexico City, as you can see here on the map. Other non-familiar to our palate protein sources would have included things like iguanas, gophers, the axolotl salamander seen in the lower right, and a diverse variety of edible insects, which includes roasted grasshoppers called chapulines in the lower left, and maguey worms to the immediate right, both of which are still consumed in modern times, although the maguey worm is usually found at the bottom of a bottle of cheap tequila. The Aztecs acquired animal or insect-based protein wherever they could find it. However, the items listed on this page were not a major part of their diet. In the main, they had to rely on plant-based protein. In order to feed one of the largest populations on the planet, the Aztecs largely relied on an innovative farming technique called chinampas, which was a network of canals and artificial islands created from dredged material at the bottom of the system of shallow lakes surrounding their capital city. In addition to having fertile soil, remember what I said about night soil earlier, chinampas employed sustainable farming practices like crop rotation and planting companion crops. The gardeners in attendance have no doubt heard of the Three Sisters, a Mesoamerican farming practice developed for three Mesoamerican mutually beneficial crops: corn, beans, and squash. Corn stalks provide a structure for the bean tendrils to climb, and while corn depletes the soil of nitrogen, the companion beans help to replenish it, all while the large squash leaves cover the barren ground, helping to lower the evaporation rate and creating an inhospitable environment for weeds to take root. In sum, chinampas were one of the most productive and sustainable agricultural models ever invented, allowing these indigenous peoples to prosper. While the Aztecs grew numerous other pseudo-cereal grains, corn was easily their most important crop, so much so that they included the maize god, Centeotl, into their pantheon of deities. Also, it's amazing to think what this modern staple comes from. In the image to the lower left, the scraggly-looking grass on the left side is teosinte, the precursor to corn. And after untold generations of selective breeding, we finally arrive with present-day corn on the right. As impressive as this might be as an agricultural achievement, corn is lacking on the nutritional scoreboard, especially as a source of protein. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and for optimum health in humans, we require 22 different amino acids. Most can be synthesized in the body, but not all. And these are considered essential amino acids because we have to acquire them in our diet. Plant-based protein, though, it's tricky because plants, especially cereal grains like corn, seldom have the full complement of essential amino acids. And without the full complement of essential amino acids, we simply need to keep consuming more and more until we've ingested enough of the limiting nutrient. Corn has two limiting essential amino acids, lysine and tryptophan, both of which are practically non-existent. So a corn-based diet like the Aztecs would have needed complementary foods rich with the amino acids that are so lacking in corn. Beans would have helped fill that void. They contain lysine, but they are not nearly as complementary as Huitlacoche. The corn fungus, in general, has a higher protein content than other edible fungi, but where it really excels is as a companion food to the plant it parasitizes. With its rich and diverse group of complementary amino acids, especially the lysine and tryptophan so lacking in corn. Huitlacoche has up to 14% protein and 16 different amino acids in total. And by including it in a corn-based meal, even one containing beans, the overall nutritional value rises substantially. I'll remind you now the name of this presentation is Huitlacoche, the mushroom that built an empire, and leave you to ponder just how much of an impact the lowly corn fungus, along with the Aztecs' appetite for it, may have helped shape the path of human history. The end.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Are there any questions about that? If anybody would like to ask, we have a moment or two.
And I haven't mentioned, we've got everyone muted, but right now, in a situation like this where William asks for questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. But also, there's a chat that you can get to at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you move your mouse, and you can type questions in there. William Robertson is saying he's heard that someone has found it locally. Is that true, Tom? That it can grow up here as well?
Huitlacoche can grow anywhere that you can grow good melons or watermelons. You can find Huitlacoche. Or at least that's it. I don't know where to find it in the local region myself, but that's what, according to the literature I've read, if you can grow good melons, you can get Huitlacoche.
And how would you describe the taste?
Well, I would say I didn't include anything on the culinary side because I figured we'd handle that in a Q&A. This is my take on the taste for Huitlacoche. First off, like any ingredient, the fresh stuff is much better than the canned stuff. I think that's especially true with Huitlacoche. I've been to Mexico many times, and fresh Huitlacoche is far better than canned Huitlacoche. With that said, the canned stuff can still be good, but it tends to be a lot darker and more watery than the fresh stuff. From culinary applications, I think there's a couple recipes that I kept coming across. In Mexico, the vast majority of Huitlacoche is eaten in a quesadilla, which is the Mexican version of a toasted cheese sandwich, except they're adding some Huitlacoche to the mix in this, and probably some peppers or something else spicy. I also noticed I was going through my collection of cookbooks. Yes, I have a collection of cookbooks. I saw this one, Mexico the Beautiful cookbook, and on one of the recipes in there, they used to serve Huitlacoche soup for all the state dinners in Mexico for about 10 years during the 60s.
Wow.
And so that's another possibility. The one that I thought that was very interesting is Mexico has an interesting past relationship with France. In the 1860s, under Napoleon III, Mexico was invaded by the French, and briefly, and for a few years, took control of the country, installed a leader, Emperor Maximilian. So there was some blending of classic French cuisine and classic Mexican cuisine during this period. And according to this book, one of the favorite dishes of Emperor Maximilian was crepes stuffed with Huitlacoche. So that's another possibility.
Sounds like a quesadilla, French style. Someone asked, was there protein deficiency during Aztec times? Do we know how widespread was this for them?
I think they consumed an awful lot of Huitlacoche. I don't know how much protein deficiency they had, but the capital city of Tenochtitlan was enormous. I think they estimate the population of Tenochtitlan at being something like 5 times the size of London. So, they must not have had nutrient deficiencies to support a population that large.
But do people purposely cultivate it, or do they just collect it when it comes up on corn crops?
No, you can cultivate it. That was the other thing I was going to handle in the Q&A, so thank you for that. So, as I was saying before, with Huitlacoche, these spores, these teleospores, the dark spores, when they fall onto the ground, they can last there for years and years. So before you try to cultivate Huitlacoche and at your own private garden, you want to think about where you're actually trying to do this at. Because if you get those teliospores on the ground where you're trying to raise regular sweet corn, you know, you're gonna have a lot more infection. So what type of corn does Huitlacoche infect? It will infect all types of corn, but it works best on sweet corn. And it makes no difference whatsoever whether it's heirloom or hybrid, doesn't matter. Now, what you need to inoculate the corn is obviously you need some fresh spores. So you got to get your hands on some fresh Huitlacoche. And what you want to do is you want to make a slurry with that in the blender with a little bit of water, and then let it set out to ferment for a quick ferment for maybe 1 or 2 days. And then in order to increase the inoculation rate, what you want to do is you take that slurry, and what most people do is they'll put it into one of those metal injection syringes that I think they use for barbecue, and put that into the channel at the top of the cob of ear and just squirt some of that slurry directly inside of the ear. And that'll result in almost 100% inoculation.
That's all the questions from the chat, William.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. I'm going to now just briefly, very briefly, I have a section that I do fungi in the news, and there's a couple interesting things here that I think I'll share with you. This is from The Economist, which is, it's a magazine, but it's really a newspaper disguised as a magazine. It's not really about the economy at all. It's not an advertisement. It's a very good read and put together by very good people. And on the last page, they have graphic details. This one is on genomics. And it's the things that have been sequenced, numbers of items since 2003. And it struck me, it's got this graph going from 2001 to 2020. Protists, about 100. Plants, about 500. Animals, about 2,000. And the top of the list, fungi, 2,500 have been sequenced. So that's a surprising thing. I'm not sure their data is I'm sure correct. I was surprised by that. The second thing, we've been having this ongoing discussion about psilocybin and psychedelic mushrooms because, as you know, they're approaching mainstream. So whenever anything comes up, this is a study that was done at Maastricht University in Netherlands. A lot of people have wondered, well, why is psilocybin have this effect? And this is going back to even Timothy Leary, this idea of seeing God, losing your ego. And so they've actually found a connection between the effect of psilocybin on one of the neurotransmitters, glutamate, which has an effect of lowering your ego. And so they're discovering that's where your ego lives, if you will. And so it's actually disrupting your sense of being who you are and being part of everybody else. So there's actually a mental state that is being changed by that. So anyway, interesting subject that's continuing. The third one is on beetles. And you know, they live in trees, pretty much, a lot of them, in bark. And I always sort of thought, well, you know, there's obviously got to be a really close relationship between beetles and fungi. And there's a whole study going on to try and figure out the extent to which that is a prevalent symbiosis. And I think it probably is. And this is actually a call for papers and funding on it rather than, I don't think we know much about it at all. So anyway, I think it's a good subject to perhaps see if we could learn more about. Apparently, there's not a whole lot of data. And the last thing is, we've got our work cut out for us. This is a cartoon out of the Washington Post on Sunday. I don't read cartoon, funny papers, but this caught my eye. It's the cartoon Zits. And this is the guy, Jeremy, who was a teenager. I don't know if you can see this, probably not. But his mother's telling him to clean up his room, and she's looking down and sees nothing but toadstools. solid street, that would explain the patch of toadstools growing in the, not mushrooms. So the point is that the world still thinks of those, of mushrooms as toadstools, which is the pejorative side of that. All right, so that's fungi in the news. And now we're going to talk about, and in the Monty Python, here's something really interesting. So I'm now going to turn it over to Mitch, the 4A chair, who is going to share with you some of the mushrooms that have been mailed in for identification. And he's got about a 10-15 minute presentation on those. And I think then we'll open it up if he's still got time for anybody else that wants to show one. And so Mitch, you're on next, and I'm going to go mute while you're talking.
Cool. All right, let me get this thing going. That work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So anyway, I imagine everybody saw the email I sent out, and I'm still going to be accepting any pictures. So if you go out, take pictures if you want to, and send them to me. If you want to mention anything in the chat, feel free. If you want to just kind of talk, unmute and speak up if you'd like. But I'm going to kind of go through these relatively quickly. So anyway, this is what's in your neck of the woods. So I'm just going to jump right in. And we've got our first submitted by Clara. By the way, I'm only going to pronounce first names. I hope y'all don't mind. I don't want to mess up y'all's last ones. This was found growing on a dead stump low to the ground. A lot of you guys might have figured this one out already. This is one of the reishi, or the varnish shelf mushrooms. And due to its being very close to the ground, not much of a stem, I'm calling this one Ganoderma sessile. This one was submitted by D. This one's a little bit more problematic in my estimation. I initially thought, well, this kind of looks like a dryad saddle, but it's missing some of the features. This one's getting older. The pores look a bit big. A lot of times you'll start getting a black stem base on this mushroom, but it didn't happen. But it might just be an odd looking one. So I was going to stick with the Polyporus squamosus on that one. So this one was submitted by Chandler. This was found on a wood stump. You guys may have seen some of these. They have been extremely common this year. They've just been growing everywhere. So this is Panis neostragosus. You see the real furry tops. It's very distinct. A lot of times they'll have some purple colors going on in them. They can cover stumps. Pretty cool little mushroom. So this one was submitted by John. It was found in Chapman State Park, Indian Head, earlier in June. This is much larger than you usually see them, but this is wood ear. And so this used to be called Auricula auriculae, and they've decided to change that to Auricula angiospermarium. That's the one that grows on hardwood. The auriculae apparently does not grow in America, so we have a different species here. It's weird not having questions. All right, so this is another one submitted by John in Greenbelt a day later. This isn't actually a mushroom. It's actually a slime mold. This is the same picture. I just blew up a little portion right in the middle so you could see a little more detail, but you can see the little squiddy little tentacles there. And so this is actually a slime mold. It grew very well. This is Ceratiomyxa fruticulosa. So this is one submitted by Giselle, found along the Potomac on the Billy Goat Trail. This is one of those times where it would be good to have the specimen in your hand because it's not very descript. It's just little white knobs. I'm guessing it may be another Ganoderma just emerging. I tried to zoom in on some of these little resin drops that it's creating. That may be what it is. It may also be a Loeomyces, which is fairly common, and it's about this size, although the stem base may not look the same. But if we had that in your hand, then you could see much more detail. That's, you know, like that Polyporus squamosus, if I would have been able to look at that and take a whiff, you'd immediately know, okay, yeah, that's a dryad saddle. This one, maybe not so much.
Rich, we have a request in chat to just mention if things are edible or not.
Ah, okay. The auricula was, the Ganoderma, of course, is a medicinal mushroom. Polyporus squamosus, if that's what it was, is an edible, although I don't know that people would necessarily be, you know, chasing you through the woods to find that one. But yeah, I'll do that from now on, if I know. So this is another submitted by Estella. This was found walking through a neighborhood. You can see there's quite a few little pieces emerging there. So this is another Ganoderma species. And you'll notice that this one has more of a stem. And so I put the name Ganoderma curtisii. Apparently we don't have lucidum. We used to call these things lucidum and tsuge and you know, among other things, and apparently that they're not really here, so they've started putting new names. That doesn't mean, you know, this is a different mushroom that's just shown up. It's the same mushroom, it's just got a different name. Trying to be more accurate in our naming. This is another medicinal. So this was submitted by Doug and Susan, found while they were bicycling. You guys might be able to make a guess at that one. And it was chicken of the woods. I believe it looks like, go ahead. I believe it looks like Laetiporus cincinnatus. At first I thought it had some yellow on the underside, but I don't think so. Plus it's growing in a rosette. So, you know, a lot of times sulphureus will be growing from the wood, more shelf-like, whereas cincinnatus, it tends to grow towards the base from the wood in a rosette pattern like this. And you were asking about edibility. Well, they did decide to eat that one, which it is edible. It's a good thing. All right, so this is submitted by John, found in the Brighton Azalea Garden. This is on a damaged tulip poplar, or dead or dying, it looks like. This one's a little odd, so I'm pretty sure this is another wood ear. I'm not sure if it's a different species. It tends to have, some of them do grow with this kind of white fuzz on the top. But I'm not sure if that's a different species or just a different growth stature. For a minute there, I thought it was Glioporus dicrois, which can have a white cap and a gelatinous pore layer that's brown. But looking at this picture on the right there, I think this is Auricula, Angiospermarium. And that's, if you eat hot and sour soup, the little black strips that you can find in there, that's the mushroom, or at least a species of this mushroom that they slice up and add to that soup. It actually has blood thinning properties. So this one was also submitted by John, and if you notice, this is actually the same tree. And so if you look up and to the left, I believe that's those auricularia up there on that same stump. It's probably these mushrooms that drew his eye. and it looks like they are oyster mushrooms to me. And I put the name Pleurotus pulmonarius on here just because it's summer. They usually don't have as a large of a stem as your Ostreatus, which tends to grow in cooler weather. So these do have some relatively large stems, the ones in the back there, but I think we're close enough there. All right, another one submitted by John, and these are some cute little orange guys, or red-orange. Very conical, very glutinous and slimy. I believe these are, I may be wrong on these, Hygrophorus are not some of my my best, or I can't identify Hygrophorus as well as some others. But I believe this is Hygrocebi cuspidata, which is basically the witch's cap. And so the witch's cap can look similar to this, except everywhere you touch it, it will relatively quickly stain black. But this one does not stain, but looks very similar. They're also getting a little bit old. So this is submitted by David, found in the DC metro area. This is a pretty hefty guy, as you can see from the ruler right there. This is a Berkeley's polypore. It's fairly young, so it hasn't gotten quite big yet, but it's a really nice picture, and you can see pretty good details. It's another polypore. This is an edible mushroom. I don't know that I've ever tried it, and I don't know that people think that it's very tasty. Some do, some don't. But like I said, I've never tried it. It can get very large. It's Bonderzoia berkelii. And we actually happen to have another person, this is submitted by Carrie, who found the same, similar, or the same mushroom, and I'm guessing a different area, another Bonderzoia, and you can see how large it can get. And they can get even bigger than this. I had one in my yard growing from a stump one time, and they are prolific spore producers. And after a while, I don't know, a week or two, it just had, like somebody had dusted the ground with flour. And you can see a smaller, immature version that I imagine was growing nearby. And Matt had some pictures, and so I figured I'd throw these in. These were some really nice images. You can see Phlebia incarnata there. It's the coral pink Marulius. It's got this really cool, wavy, weird hymenium. And it's nice. He's got the picture. It also has some sterium in there. And I believe that this is actually not necessarily growing, or well, I don't know that it's necessarily known, but it's almost inevitably going to be growing with Sterium ostrea. So if you find this mushroom, if you look at the log, you're gonna find Sterium ostrea on it somewhere. Not an edible, not that it's toxic or anything, but I don't know that it's very good. Now this one right next to it, it's a beautiful specimen, Amanita jacksonii. It's pretty classic. You can kind of see, you can kind of see the remnant, I believe, of, oh wait, I can do this, can't I? Of a partial veil right there, and it's kind of orange colored. They tend to have, I say herringbone, it's not necessarily, but it's kind of like this zigzag pattern, oftentimes on the stem. It's got this very membranous vulva sac that it emerges from, which doesn't leave any patches on the top there. And this is a good edible Amanita. Now, that being said, it is an Amanita, so don't go picking Amanitas willy-nilly and trying to eat them. You really got to know what you have. I'm pretty sure I found this one when I was less experienced and was like, nah. And eventually, over time, decided to give it a try, and it is pretty tasty. We have a black staining polypore, pretty large, kind of looks like the Bonderzoia, the Berkeley's polypore, but you can see, I don't know whether it's bugs or just something damaged it or bruised it, and it's getting these black staining portions all throughout it. I thought it kind of looked almost like blue cheese. We've also got the stinky squid. You can see these growing a lot on mulch in areas. Pseudocolus fusiformis, you would not want to eat those, though they probably are not toxic. I don't know of any poisonous stinkhorns. Then you've got Geronima stromboides. This is the wood-loving Clitosobe. This is a very common mushroom. Sometimes people will think it may be chanterelles, but these tend to be more yellow. When they're younger, they're small. You can kind of see this dark coloration in the center. When they're young and the cap hasn't expanded, that dark color is much more pronounced, and as it opens, those little spots spread apart and show the yellow underneath. Then this was submitted by Estella. She found what looks like Chlorophyll molybdites to me, even though it looks like it has brown gills. Over time, they can turn brown, but this should have green spores. Very toxic. It won't kill you necessarily, but you will wish you were dead. We've got another stinkhorn here. This is Phallus rubicundus, and you can see it's got this little external cap. So some stinkhorns will have the gleba, which is the spores, literally on the surface of the tip. Rubicundus tends to have a little skirted cap that has the gleba on it, and you can see the flies are loving it. And what happens is they get those spores on their feet, and they fly off and go and land somewhere else and distribute the spores instead of using wind or something, or rain or whatever to distribute the spores. It uses insects. This little Russula, possibly a Marie. It looks like it's a little more sturdy and robust than your typical Marie. Marie tends to be purple with like a bloom on the top. It also has some purplish color, pinkish on the stipe there. So it may be, but that's another one where I would need more work. So anyway, that's one of your Russulas. They're very brittle, mostly whitish gills. They snap easy like chalk, in the same family as Lactarius, but they don't have any latex. Anyway, thanks to everyone who participated. Someone had sent me some pictures of morels, so I figured I'd throw them in there, even though this isn't the right time. And whoops. So anyway, thanks. And if you guys want to participate, send emails, and I can throw them into a little meeting like this, or a little presentation like this. All right, questions, comments?
Lots of people posted extra pictures in the comments, but I'm worried that if we keep
Yeah, we
going
should
through them, it'll
probably
take too long.
Save them for next
The
time.
one comment I have left is that I'm surprised you didn't have any pictures of chanterelles, because just in the last several days, we've been finding a lot of chanterelles.
I was actually surprised as well. I would think boletes would start coming up about now.
Yeah.
I had Russula, I just got home from Virginia. I had Russula compacta, which I've never seen in my yard before growing out there. So lots of Russulas should be coming up. The chanterelles should be up. I don't know if you like the way that I did it. I was trying to get a far away picture to kind of give you a start, and then the next one would be kind of your close-ups. I don't mind doing a bunch all together, but it's a little, it's less focused per mushroom. Anyway, if you think I should send out another email, or you can just use the same one from before, I'm at 4as@mawdc.org. Feel free to send pictures. I'll send out the little note again of
That was
what I was.
great. And John Harper was speculating that with this many pictures, we might be able to do this more than just at the monthly meeting, that we could actually have like a little 4A Zoom meeting.
Yeah, that's
and
cool too.
Look at pictures. So we can talk about that, and we'll let
And then
everyone know by
we can
email.
have more time to talk. But yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds cool.